My sister leaned close, smiled for the engagement photos, then whispered, "Stay in the back tonight. I don't want my fiancé thinking I come from low-class people." A second later, she turned to the guests and laughed. "He's my brother, but don't let the cheap suit fool you. He never became anyone important." The room exploded with laughter. I stayed silent. I had learned long ago that the truth never needs to shout. Then the ballroom doors opened. Her Navy SEAL fiancé walked in, looked straight at me, went completely pale, dropped a champagne glass, and whispered, "Sir, I thought you were dead." My sister looked me up and down in front of nearly 80 guests, smirked, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Could you at least hide your low-class job tonight? My fiancé is a Navy SEAL captain. He can't stand unimpressive people." The room erupted with laughter. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I simply smiled and stayed quiet. Then her fiancé finally turned toward me. The second our eyes met, the color drained from his face. His champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattered across the marble floor, and he whispered just 4 words that silenced the entire ballroom. "Sir, what are you doing here?" 3 hours earlier, I never imagined the evening would end like that. "My name is Daniel Carter, and for most of my life, I've learned that people judge you long before they know your story, especially family." My younger sister, Emily, had always believed success came wrapped in expensive clothes, luxury cars, and impressive job titles. Growing up, we hadn't been wealthy. Mom worked double shifts as a nurse, and Dad repaired heating systems across the county. Every dollar mattered. When I turned 18, I enlisted. Emily was only 12 then. She used to tell everyone her big brother was a hero. Funny how time changes people. After 22 years of military service, I retired quietly. I didn't chase television interviews. I didn't write books. I didn't brag about medals or operations nobody was allowed to discuss anyway. I wanted peace. So I bought a modest home outside Denver and started working for a nonprofit that helped veterans transition back into civilian life. The paycheck wasn't spectacular, but every evening I slept knowing someone's life had become a little easier because of my work. To me, that was enough. To Emily, it was embarrassing. Whenever relatives gathered, she'd casually mention that I never really made anything of myself after leaving the military. She'd compare me to investment bankers, surgeons, startup founders, anyone whose income sounded impressive. I usually ignored it. Arguing with someone desperate for validation never changes their mind. When Emily announced she was engaged to Navy SEAL Captain Ryan Mitchell, our parents acted as if royalty had entered the family. Every conversation became about Ryan, his decorations, his leadership, his future, his status. I was genuinely happy for her. Anyone willing to serve deserved respect. I'd never met Ryan, though. His deployments had kept him overseas almost their entire relationship. Tonight would be our first meeting. The engagement celebration was held inside one of Denver's most expensive hotels. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. A string quartet played softly near the ballroom entrance, while waiters carried silver trays loaded with champagne. I felt slightly underdressed in my simple navy suit. Not because it was old, because everyone else looked determined to prove something. Emily spotted me the second I walked in. She smiled for the cameras, then immediately frowned at me.
"Daniel," she sighed.
"You actually wore that?" I looked down. "It's a suit." "It's not about the suit," she whispered sharply. "It's about appearances." I handed her the wrapped engagement gift. "A little something for both of you." She barely glanced at it before handing it to a nearby table. "Thanks." No smile. No appreciation. Just obligation. Several cousins wandered over. One asked where I worked these days. Before I could answer, Emily laughed. "Oh, don't ask." Everyone looked toward her. She took a sip of champagne before saying loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear, "My brother works some tiny nonprofit job helping veterans." Sweet, I guess, but definitely not impressive. A few people chuckled. Someone muttered, "That's different." Emily wasn't finished. She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound cruel instead of playful. "Please don't spend all night talking about that job." I blinked. "Why?" She smiled. My fiancé is a Navy SEAL captain. I know. He can't stand people with no ambition. A few nearby guests laughed again. Then came the sentence I don't think I'll ever forget. Honestly, Daniel, just hide your low-class work tonight. Silence settled around us. Even the musicians seemed quieter. I could have defended myself. I could have listed the years I'd served, the places I'd been, the people I'd buried. Instead, I simply smiled. If that's what makes you happy. She rolled her eyes. It does. Just then, the ballroom doors opened. Conversations stopped almost instantly. Ryan Mitchell had arrived.
Tall, calm,
Perfectly dressed. The confidence of someone used to responsibility filled the room before he spoke a single word. Guests applauded as he crossed the ballroom toward Emily. She kissed him proudly before pointing in my direction. Ryan, she said with a grin. I want you to meet my brother. He turned casually, then froze. His eyes locked onto mine. Every trace of color disappeared from his face. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered across the marble floor. The entire ballroom fell silent. Ryan stared at me for several long seconds. Then slowly, he raised his trembling hand. Sir. The ballroom became so quiet that all I could hear was the slow drip of champagne sliding across the polished marble floor. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Ryan Mitchell kept staring at me as if he'd forgotten where he was. Emily forced a nervous laugh. Ryan, what are you doing? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked straight past her. Every step echoed across the room. When he finally reached me, he stopped, stood perfectly straight, and extended his hand with unmistakable respect. Sir, he said, his voice steady now, it's an honor to see you again. I accepted the handshake. It's been a long time, Captain. His eyes lit up with a smile. Too long. The guests looked from him to me, completely confused. Emily frowned. You two know each other? Ryan turned toward her. Know each other? He almost laughed. Daniel Carter isn't just someone I know. He looked back at me. He was one of the finest instructors I ever served under. A wave of whispers swept across the ballroom. Instructor? I thought he worked at a nonprofit. Did she say he wasn't successful? Emily crossed her arms. Ryan, I think there's been some misunderstanding. There isn't. His answer came instantly. He looked around the room before speaking again. You all see a quiet man wearing an ordinary suit. I see the leader who taught an entire generation of operators that courage isn't about looking fearless. The room fell silent again. Ryan slowly picked up a clean napkin from a nearby table and set it over the broken glass before continuing. I was 26 during advanced winter survival training. It was the worst blizzard I'd ever experienced. Snow was falling so heavily we couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Temperatures dropped fast. Visibility disappeared. Everything that could go wrong
did.
One member of our team suffered a serious injury after slipping down an icy ridge. Communication equipment stopped working. Several of us were exhausted. Panic started spreading. Ryan looked directly at me, but not him. He stayed calm. He organized everyone. He made decisions nobody else wanted to make. He carried far more weight than anyone should have. Several guests leaned closer. Nobody was touching their food anymore. Ryan continued. I remember thinking we weren't getting out, but Daniel never allowed fear to become contagious. He reminded us that leadership isn't shouting. It's giving people hope when they're convinced there isn't any left. I lowered my eyes. There were parts of that week I still didn't enjoy remembering. Ryan smiled slightly. He didn't save us with some dramatic speech. He saved us by refusing to quit. When rescue finally reached us, every member of that team came home. He paused. I've never forgotten that. One elderly guest whispered, My goodness. Emily looked increasingly uncomfortable. She stepped closer. Ryan, why have you never told me any of this? He answered honestly. Because Daniel never did. That sentence landed harder than anything else he'd said. He looked back at me. I tried thanking you after graduation. You told me something I'll never forget. I smiled faintly. I don't remember. I do. Ryan repeated my words almost exactly. The best leaders never spend their lives reminding people who they are. The ballroom remained completely silent. My father slowly removed his glasses. Mom looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Confusion, regret, maybe both. Emily finally found her voice. That's all years ago. Ryan looked at her.
No.
It isn't. She shrugged. He retired. Yes. And now he works some ordinary job. I answered before Ryan could. I help veterans rebuild their lives. She waved her hand dismissively. Exactly. Ryan's expression changed. Not anger, disappointment. The kind that hurts far more. You say that as if serving people is something to be ashamed of. Emily blinked. I didn't mean. You called your own brother low class. Several guests looked away. No one wanted to meet his eyes. Ryan continued quietly. The first lesson Daniel ever taught us was simple. Character doesn't disappear when the uniform comes off. He looked around the ballroom. It seems some people here forgot that. The silence became almost unbearable. Emily's confidence had completely vanished. She reached for Ryan's arm. Can we please stop talking about this? He gently stepped back. Then he slipped the engagement ring from his finger. No one breathed. He stared at the ring for several long seconds before closing his hand around it. When he finally looked up, his voice was calm. Emily, I need to ask you one question before I decide whether we still have a future together. The entire ballroom waited. So tell me, why would someone who claims to love me treat the person I respect most like he was worth less than everyone else in this room? No one answered. Not Emily. Not my parents. Not a single guest. The only sound in the ballroom came from the string quartet, which had quietly stopped playing halfway through the conversation. Ryan stood patiently, still holding the engagement ring in his palm. His question remained hanging in the air. Emily finally swallowed. I wasn't trying to be cruel. Ryan looked at her. Then what were you trying to be? She searched the room as if someone else might answer for her. They just don't understand. He frowned. Help me understand. She took a deep breath. My brother always settled. He never wanted more. He retired, took a small job, lives in a normal house. She hesitated. I just wanted people to see us as successful. Ryan didn't speak immediately. Instead, he slowly turned toward me. Sir, may I say something? I nodded. Go ahead. He faced everyone in the ballroom. When I was younger, I thought success meant collecting medals. I thought promotions defined a person. I thought respect came from rank. He smiled faintly. Then I met Daniel. He taught me something far more valuable. He looked directly at Emily. The strongest people rarely need to announce they're strong. They let their actions speak. Every eye shifted toward me. For years, I had avoided being the center of attention. Tonight, I had no choice. I stepped forward. If I may. Ryan nodded and quietly stepped beside me. I looked around the room. I know tonight hasn't gone the way anyone expected. A few uneasy laughs escaped from the guests. I also know Emily isn't the only person who's judged someone by appearances. Several people lowered their eyes. I left military service because I wanted a different mission. I'd spent decades in places where families waited for phone calls they prayed would never come. I had accomplished everything I wanted in uniform. So, I asked myself one question. What kind of life do I want after service? The answer had been surprisingly simple. I wanted to help people without headlines. I wanted peace. I wanted mornings where no one depended on me to make life or death decisions. I found that purpose helping veterans rebuild theirs.
Some needed jobs.
Some needed housing. Some simply needed someone willing to listen. I've never considered that work small. The room remained silent. I looked at Emily. But somewhere along the way, you started believing value could be measured by applause. Tears filled her eyes. I'm sorry. I really am. I thought if people admired us, they'd admire me. Our mother quietly covered her mouth. Dad walked over slowly until he stood beside me. I owe you an apology too. His voice cracked. We spent years celebrating titles and somehow forgot to celebrate character. Mom hugged my arm. We should have known better. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Ryan carefully placed the engagement ring on the table beside him instead of back onto his finger. He turned toward Emily. I still care about you, but marriage isn't built on appearances. It survives because of respect. If someone can publicly humiliate their own brother, one day they may humiliate their spouse. Emily closed her eyes. I understand. No, Ryan answered gently. I think tonight is the first time you truly do. She nodded through tears. I have a lot to change. Ryan looked at me once more. Sir, I've thanked you before for helping shape the officer I became. But tonight, you reminded me what kind of husband I want to become. I smiled. You don't owe me thanks. Just remember what matters. He extended his hand. I shook it. The ballroom finally erupted into applause. Not because anyone had won, not because anyone had lost, but because truth has a strange way of quieting pride. As the evening drew to a close, guests came over one by one, not to ask about medals, not to ask about secret missions. They asked about the veterans I worked with, about rebuilding lives, about finding purpose after service. Those were the conversations that mattered. As I walked toward the exit, Emily caught up with me. I'm sorry, Daniel. I don't expect forgiveness today. I just hope I can earn it someday. I gave her a small smile. Respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you practice. Then I stepped outside into the cool evening air. Behind me stood a luxury hotel filled with expensive suites, sparkling lights, and polished marble. Ahead of me was an ordinary parking lot and my aging pickup truck. For the first time all night, I smiled, because I realized something. People can mistake humility for weakness. They can mistake simplicity for failure. But character doesn't need a spotlight to shine. And the people who truly deserve your respect usually aren't the ones asking for it.